Like a lot of kids, Christmas time was extremely special to me. My mother didn't make a lot of money, but when the holidays hit, she made sure to scrape and save every penny so me and my sisters had something we really wanted. For a time it was He-Man and Voltron, then it was Transformers and G.I. Joe. But in 1986 I had wanted something only a precious few of my friends had the luck of scoring, my very own Nintendo Entertainment System. Released in high-volume markets the year before in late 1985, I had only one classmate that had the thing. I had gone over to their houses a number of times to soak up as much Nintendo goodness as I possibly could. I played such classics as Excitebike, Kung Fu, Super Mario Bros., and Wild Gunman. But as the Christmas of 1986 grew closer, I had begun to want one to call my own. Nintendo had finally started flooding the retail market nationwide with the console and games that year, and more kids at my school were getting them. Donkey Kong, Popeye, Mach Rider, and 1942 really hammered home my need to get one. When Christmas morning rolled around, my mom came through, and I had an NES to call my own. I finally had a home console that really excited me, and 1987 would be one of the best and most memorable years of gaming I'd ever had. Of course, back then I had to rely on the goodwill of friends to play anything. I borrowed games every chance I got and played the heck out of stuff like Super Mario Bros. For months, but after a while, I was hungry for more. Fortunately, throughout 1987, the popularity of Nintendo had skyrocketed at my school. Many more kids would get the NES, so my access to newer games grew substantially. Mostly I would borrow older titles that other kids had gotten tired of, but I didn't mind at all. Just having the ability to play titles at this level of quality was more than enough. Hell, I even had to play on an old black and white TV at that point, so I can't stress enough how much this new device meant to me. I had been an arcade kid, and for the first time in my life, I finally felt like a home console did those games well enough to be worth my attention. But as 1987 went on, I discovered so much more than just arcade conversions. Russian Attack had been a Konami arcade game before it landed on the NES in April of '87. The home port underwent numerous changes to the story and presentation, but was very similar overall to its coin-op cousin. Your job was to destroy a secret weapon behind enemy lines, starting out with nothing but a freaking knife. Yeah, it's a difficult one, and you'll need to put in some time to see the ending. It does have two-player co-op, and though it's little more than a simple run and gun, I enjoyed it for what it was. It was a simpler time, and games like this could flourish based on its nice sounding graphics and the fact you could play it with a friend. Konami also brought track and field home to the NES that year, and it was a button masher's dream come true. It had events like the 100-meter dash, long jump, hurdles, javelin throw, skeet shooting, triple jump, archery, and the high jump. Don't think for a second that the simple mechanics made this one any less fun or challenging. Get a few friends together, and you could waste hours on this. Getting the best results often took more than just pressing the buttons fast. You also had to get your timing down. The variety in the events was fantastic, and while it wasn't the best looking NES title, it held its own well enough. Its sequel was better in just about every way, but I still have fond memories of the original. Oh yeah, it was 1987 when the first NES Castlevania became available in North America. This was a landmark title for me in every way. The graphics, the sound, the themes at play, everything about this title hooked me from the moment I first played it. It was part video game, part monster movie. A glorious concoction that would see 3 excellent mainline releases on Nintendo's 8-bit behemoth. The whip-based gameplay was so fresh, and the secondary weapons added a ton of possibilities to how you played it. It was another difficult one, with later stages being brutal to newcomers. It's a classic and one of those games I still smile at whenever I see it played. Nintendo kept the new titles coming, and Kid Icarus was born in 1987 as well. I had played nothing like this when it was first released. It was an action platformer that had stages that scrolled both horizontally and vertically. It starred Pit, who armed with his trusty bow, must save Angel Land from the evil Medusa. You must liberate the sacred treasures in order to have the power to face her in the final battle. I tried like hell to beat this one back then, but could never quite make it to the end. While Pit had access to power-ups, I never felt the balance was well done regarding your abilities. I always felt weak and overwhelmed by enemy forces. Still, the setup itself held appeal, and it was certainly a good-looking and sounding title for the time. Next to games like Castlevania though, it just didn't have the same quality. One of the first NES games I played from Tecmo was Mighty Bomb Jack, a sequel to the arcade game Bomb Jack. It sorta took the same premise and expanded on it, which was mainly a collect-a-thon that had you opening various treasure chests for score. It wasn't a very deep game, nor was it anything special in the graphics and sound department, but I could get my dad to play it some, and that was enough for me. The level variety was actually kinda cool. It had single screen stages as well as both horizontal and vertically scrolling areas. Some power-ups allow you to open chests easier, while others turn enemies into coins to be collected. I couldn't play this one much today, but back then it served as a rare link between me and my dad, and that was worth its weight in gold. Another Tecmo game released in 1987 was Rygar. Instead of just porting the arcade original to the NES, Tecmo actually recreated it as an adventure platformer with both side-scrolling and overhead levels. It was a near-perfect 8-bit experience too. You start out lacking the power and abilities you need to face the evil Rygar. You have to search out items to help you navigate the world, level up your attack, and defeat the many enemies spread around for you to discover. The graphics were incredible. This universe had you climbing towers in the sky, running through dark forests, and scaling sun-stained mountaintops. The music was simply unforgettable. The kind of tunes that get burned into your mind, and sitting here right now, I can close my eyes and perfectly replicate it in my memory. It was one of the finest 8-bit titles I'd play that generation, and my favorite game released on this platform. I describe Metroid, originally released in 1987, with only one word: intimidating. While the gameplay itself was simple enough to understand, the world was nothing short of terrifying. Stages went on forever, enemies respawned in every room, and good God did you feel lost at every turn. This was one of those games that without help, it could be a really bad experience. And hot damn did I hate it upon first inspection. What was I supposed to do? Where was I supposed to go? But once that help came in the form of a Nintendo Power magazine, this confusing enigma became a classic. Power-ups, exploration, and boss encounters all had incredible impact here, and once you knew what the hell you were doing and where you needed to go, it really came together into something special. Its sequel was a much better game, but this set a tone, a world, and a character that I'll never forget. The Legend of Zelda was another 1987 classic that initially overwhelmed me. For years, arcade games had been mostly straightforward affairs that you figured out in seconds. These new Nintendo games started you off with nothing, and you needed to explore, experiment, and discover its secrets to progress. I was new to all of that, but after I got a taste for it, there was no looking back. Zelda was a glorious example of game design breaking free of the shackles imposed by earlier software. You could go just about anywhere right from the get-go. You could tackle much of the game in any order you wanted. There was just so much to find, so much to do, and there was even a second quest to do it all over again once you beat it. It wasn't anything special graphically, but the music sure was memorable, the kind of stuff that really set the mood and ambiance well above your typical console game at the time. Initially, its brilliance was almost lost on an arcade kid like me, but once the appreciation was there, I'd play the heck out of it. While most of the graphics on the NES were impressive for its day, every so often a game would show up and knock your socks off. The 3D Battles of World Runner was one of those games. Imagine taking the pseudo 3D engine from Space Harrier and mixing in the enemies of Fantasy Zone, and you'll have a pretty good idea of what this is. It was incredible seeing a game like this at home in 1987. It wasn't anywhere near the level of the Sega Superscalers, but the sense of 3D movement in space was really impressive. It even had a 3D mode where you could use the old red and cyan glasses to make the screen jump out at you. The gameplay was fairly simple. Run, jump, and avoid enemies and pit deaths while collecting power-ups and other items to help you out. It really stood out at the time, and few games ever tried anything similar. Square actually developed this, one of the first times I'd see their name on an NES title. My best buddy Nate loved basketball, so when Konami's Double Dribble was released in September of 1987, he scored it soon after. Most sports games at this point had been fairly mundane affairs that rarely ever impressed visually. Double Dribble completely shattered that expectation because not only did it look good during regular gameplay, but it also had close-up cinematic shots that really blew away me and my friends. I mean, look at that. Can you imagine having seen nothing like that at home, and then all of a sudden, there it was? I mean, this is years before cinematic action titles like Ninja Gaiden and Tecmo Bowl showed up on the NES. Of course, once you learned the best places on the court to shoot from, the game became a race to see who could shoot the most, but that didn't stop us from loving it. The only thing we really wanted were the real NBA teams. Square was back again in 1987 with Rad Racer, and like 3D World Runner, you could play this sucker in 3D with a pair of red and cyan glasses. Hit the select button anytime to cut it on. The forward-scrolling animation here is top-notch. It's smooth, fast, and looks great for such modest hardware. The gameplay itself isn't much different than Sega's Outrun, but here you are on a linear path to get to the finish line. It was really nice to see stuff like this on the NES, since I enjoyed arcade games so much. Discovering new games was always nice, but I never stopped caring about the simpler experiences that could be enjoyed in between the better games. This one here was a big one. In October of 1987, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out made its way home for the NES. While it takes a few notes from Nintendo's arcade Punch-Out series, this is a new game that feels nothing like those outside of a few shared graphical assets. The gameplay here is radically more accessible and fun in my opinion, a testament to Nintendo's incredible ability to put their own unique spin on a subject. The gameplay itself is super easy to understand. The B button is your left punch and the A button is your right punch. Press up with each of these and you'll punch the face, while pressing just the buttons themselves gets you a body blow. When you get a star, that means you get a shot at a powerful uppercut, which is performed with the select button. You are Little Mac, a newcomer that must challenge 4 different professional circuits before getting a shot at Kid Dynamite himself, Mike Tyson. Each fighter oozes personality, and the boss-like quality to the way you must beat each opponent really added to the appeal. And should you lose, you'll get taunted and made fun of, strengthening your resolve to return and avenge yourself. It was one of those games where it didn't matter if you were a fan of the sport or not. The fact that you were boxing was completely unimportant because the gameplay was so well done and the presentation was so damn entertaining. It's a legend deserving of the title. The Goonies 2 was a sequel to Konami's original Goonies adventure that showed up on the Nintendo Versus arcade system. It had you exploring different areas to find items in order to deal with the Fratelli family and rescue a mermaid. The cool thing about that was aside from the platforming stages, there were also first-person areas that needed to be negotiated. These areas were much more puzzle-esque and required a bit of trial and error to find every item in secret. To be honest with you, I never could beat this without help, because some of the actions just made no sense at all. It was still a fun and deep adventure with lots to see and do, and I wasted hours trying to see it through. The original Versus Goonies actually had a home release in Japan for the Famicom, so if you are familiar with emulation or importing, you can play the entire series fairly easily these days. Konami ended their 1987 releases with Top Gun, a movie license that had you flying your very own F-14. It was a combat flight simulator where you must complete multiple missions, shooting down enemy planes and eventually a satellite in outer space. It's played from a first-person perspective and has a killer soundtrack. This was insanely popular back in those days. In fact, it's one of those games so many kids at school had, you had zero issues borrowing it for extended periods of time. But this one is tough. The kind of tough where you need to drop countless amounts of attempts to see an ending. The 3 lives you start with is all you get. Lose them, and it's back to the title screen. I could never land the damn plane properly either. I did enjoy it for short stretches, but never quite enough to invest the time to beat it. There was so much more to play, and I was needed elsewhere. You are about to hear something that most people get all bent out of shape over. I did not care for Mega Man very much when it made its late 1987 debut. The thing is, I loved the action itself. The run and gun nature of the platforming was excellent, and I really dug the boss encounters. Hell, it looked and sounded great too. But what really killed it for me were a couple of design elements that I just didn't enjoy. You couldn't duck the simplest of enemy attacks, and there were the respawning enemies at even the slightest movement of the screen. This created a layer of difficulty that just seemed cheap and just never felt all that fun to me. These enemies didn't just appear off screen and run on to give you time to react. They appeared in the exact place they were before the screen moved. So half the strategy of this one was controlling the screen as much as battling the enemies. I eventually came to love Mega Man during the X series, but I never quite cared for him during the NES days. Make no mistake, however, I had loads of friends and classmates that just adored the Blue Bomber, and when Mega Man 2 hit, he took the platform by storm. I'd personally rather play something else on the NES, but this legendary series started for many right here. It's hard to convey just how different the Nintendo system was for me when I started getting into its library. Arcade games had been so easy to pick up and play back then, so when NES exclusives started to crop up, many of them were adventures of a different sort. There are a fair few you really needed a strategy guide to help you to even think about beating the thing. That kind of depth was brand new and exciting, and went much further than your average arcade experience. The NES exposed me to games that made me think, made me explore, and took gameplay well beyond the twitch control that dominated my previous experiences. But what made the NES so special was the sheer variety in its offerings. While those new experiences were great, there were plenty of good old-fashioned arcade design at work here as well. Between hits like Metroid and Zelda, you also had winners like Track and Field and Russian Attack in those early days. Even better, you had an entire list of software that were based on arcade-style gaming, but added new gameplay elements that took them to the next level. Rygar was superior to its arcade cousin by leaps and bounds, and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out redefined Nintendo's boxing series top to bottom. It was a glorious time of discovery that led to many great days of gaming with my family and friends. It's true that Sega had made me a die-hard arcade gamer, but I would also think it's fair to say that it was Nintendo that contributed heavily to me being a console gamer. Before the NES showed up, I considered home gaming a joke, a shadow of the glory I experienced in the arcade. The level of home-based gameplay improved so much on Nintendo's machine, and at times, got even better than much of the stuff I was seeing in the arcade. For that, I'll never downplay its impact on me, and I'll always fondly remember its time on the market. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.